Hello, clever people, and welcome to my review for It. So It is based upon a Stephen King novel, one of the best-known novels of all time, actually, by one of the best-known authors. And this is the first on-screen theatrical presentation we've gotten of the story. The first one was in 1990, which was a mini-series. Wait. 1990, 2017, 27 years. But the original It, the miniseries, which I believe had Tim Curry play the main clown in it, is one that has good reviews, but not necessarily great reviews. It's said to be okay. But the main issue with it is that it's cheesy and it's overdone and it's over-stylized. So they decided to come out with this version of It that is a more grounded, realistic take on the story while not abandoning some of its fantasy-like roots. And the film basically follows a group of kids who one of them had their little brother go missing in the sewers. Their name was Georgie, and they have been missing for about a month. And when they try to go search for them, they stumble across something really weird. And as the film goes on, that weird thing they slowly begin to realize is a clown that is terrorizing them and capitalizing on their fears. And it is said that every 27 years this clown comes back to terrorize the kids. It started in 1907, it went on from there, and now it's happening again in 1988. So it's about how the group of kids band together and decide they are stronger together and attempt to destroy the creature. It is definitely one of the most anticipated films for the rest of the year, if not I think Star Wars is still above it, but a lot of people are anticipating it. It made $13.5 million last night in Thursday previews alone, which is absolutely insane for an R-rated horror movie, let alone just the movie alone. So the fact that it's making so much money clearly shows this film is making a presence, that a lot of people are looking forward to it. And while I was definitely looking forward to it, I wouldn't say that I was on the same level as other people. A lot of people were just saying that this was going to be one of the best films of the year. They thought it would be exceptional. I thought that it looked really good and really scary, but I wasn't sure about how the film would turn out. Thankfully, it proves that fast-paced horror films and fun horror films that aren't pretentious and aren't slow-paced still have a place in cinema. Unfortunately, recently, we've had a lot of really crummy teenage cash grab horror movies. Movies like Rings or The Bye-Bye Man or multiple films like that have come out recently. And thankfully, it proves that the days of really fun, entertaining, and fast-paced horror films are not completely gone. Pretty much the only good horror movies that we get these days are the ones that are slow-paced and maybe pretentious, but still very good, such as It Comes at Night was a great example of that. Mother looks like a great example of that. But with Get Out and now this, I think that we're going to get more films that are, because these two did so well financially, more films that have more effort and care put into them, that are fast-paced horror films that are entertaining. Because one thing that you cannot deny about this movie is that it is very scary and very funny. The film just works on every level that it should. People who are going out to have a fun time with this movie will come out having had a blast. It's very, very funny. All the jokes really work very well, which has a lot to do with the cast. The chemistry among these four kids and a few more kids that are added in later on is honestly exceptional. The kid actors not only do perform their roles incredibly, but the chemistry with each other is completely effortless. It's just terrific. They feel like real friends. And because of that, there's a lot of repartee that happens between them that feels very natural and makes for a lot of funny situations. The movie can have a very scary atmosphere, and it can have a very funny atmosphere in scenes that are right next to each other, and it doesn't feel too awkward, and it makes for great scenes. Now that does lead into one of my issues, which is that I did feel that there were a lot of tonal inconsistencies, but that is part of the story. Part of the story is that these kids are still having fun even though they are being terrorized by this creature. And while I was a little, that theme is a little weird to me, and the tone still made for some very weird inconsistencies, I still really did enjoy the fact that I was able to laugh at this film and be scared by it. Unlike a lot of really great horror films recently, it does not use atmosphere to try to make the film scary. What they use instead are some very memorable scenes and some very frightening imagery. The creature of it hunts down each of the kids and makes them confront their fears. For example, there's one kid who's very scared by his religion and that he's not quite standing up to what it should be, and particularly a painting that really freaks him out. And the painting starts coming into comes into a 3D form and starts terrorizing him. And the way that they had certain situations like that set up, I thought was really well done, because a lot of them are very memorable. There's a certain scene, you saw it in the trailer, where they're going through pictures. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's what they used to go through pictures. And the way that scene builds and the way that it's set up is just so well executed. Each scene in this film practically has a scary element to it, every single scene. But thankfully, it's not just scary to be scary. It all builds up and builds up to a crescendo that leads to a very scary climax. And I have to say, it is very effective in its horror and in its comedy, which are really the two things that make this movie. And I have to say this, I love the way that they represented middle school in this movie. Because if you've seen my review for Middle School, The Worst Years of My Life, or you've talked to me about film before, I have almost certainly mentioned that I am annoyed and aggravated with films that revolve around middle school. Because they are always like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or Middle School, The Worst Years of My Life. Those two films depict a very horrible image of what middle school is actually like. It's a time where kids cuss a lot. It's a time where kids are very unsure about themselves and trying to find their identity, even though they aren't really put in the best situation. It's full of bullies, and you only really have a few really great friends in middle school. And thankfully, it represents that very well. Now, their view on middle school is very cliched, and there are a few things revolving around middle school that I didn't like, particularly the bullies. Now, I understand one of the bullies goes down a rabbit hole. I won't really mention what happens, but he goes down a rabbit hole that was important to the story. However, I do have to say that there's a certain scene where the bullies carve something into something. I'm not going to say what it is for the sake of spoilers, but I thought that it was a little much, and I thought that they kind of went overboard with it. And speaking of overboard, this movie does do that a lot. It exceeds boundaries that it should, particularly in score. The score in this film was blaring and loud in far too many scenes. It was honestly really obnoxious in a lot of occasions, because the film can be really scary, but rather than using the slow-paced, dramatic horror music, of course they're going to use lighter music because this is a lighter horror movie. And unfortunately, the music is only works really like 30% of the time, and the other 70% it really fails. And with the comedic scenes as well, sometimes the score can just do really weird things that don't really fit with the movie, and that hurt it a lot. And I already mentioned it, but the tonal inconsistencies in this movie are really harsh. They're very jarring, and while I didn't note, as the film went on, I noticed them less and less when it changed. At first, it's very jarring and very weird that you have a scene where a kid is terrified and running for their life, and then suddenly it switches to a comedic scene where one kid is telling a joke. And scenes like that felt very awkward and very disjointed, but beyond that, it is not a very flawed movie. I will say there are some dumb horror cliches in this movie, but it's based on the original book, and that book was kind of made in the time where a lot of those horror cliches were being made, and it did make a few of those cliches. However, it still decides to execute quite a few of them, and there are quite a few character things that kind of felt a little bit dumb. Again, I have a hard time saying this because I have not read the book, and I'm sure that this film is a very faithful adaptation to the book, so really, the director of the film really had no choice. He had to follow the book in order to have strong success in box office. So in that way, I understand why there were some dumb horror cliches, but for the most part, it was fine. Still, I do have to say it is definitely a very enjoyable, fun movie that I can recommend to almost anyone. Horror fans will have a great time with it. Even people who don't traditionally like horror movies, they can still probably find enjoyment in the jokes, and maybe they will definitely be scared in what happens in the film. It's not necessarily creative, and it's not genre-bending, and it's not something that you'll remember very easily, but I have to say, the best analogy I can give is that it's similar to a haunted house. When you go through, there's scares around every corner. You're never really given a break. It's a lot of fun, but when you go out of it, its impact only lasts for about 5 minutes or so. And that's the best analogy I can give for it. I will give it a 7.5 out of 10. Alright, that concludes my review for It. What are your thoughts on this film, or what do you think of the book? Have you read it? Comment in the comment section below and let me know. I'm Robert Burke, and this has been The Clever Critics. Goodbye.